think I'm good to go. Are you good to go?
Sure.
Well, Marty O'Donnell, how the heck are you?
I am good, Jackson. How are you doing? It's good to meet you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's such an honor to have you on my channel.
Well, the longer I live, the more new generations of people come along and actually want to talk about stuff. So it's fun knowing that you were what, like just a kid when you first started playing what, Halo 3? Is that where you started or?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I got to semi recreate the suspense from Halo 2 to Halo 3 because I only had an Xbox in 2009. I didn't have the 360. So I
Okay.
still had to wait until I could afford a 360. So I
Okay.
still got to have that mystery at the end of Halo 2. Like, wait, what's going on?
Finishing this fight? Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
good. All right, excellent.
Yeah, one thing I really have appreciated about you that I think is fascinating is how engaged you've been in the Halo
Oh,
community on
yeah,
YouTube.
I love the Halo community. They're intelligent. You know, when I was first getting into games, people in my age bracket who had kids, just felt like, oh, well, video games are mindless, stupid things for kids to do and shouldn't let your kids do it. Or if it is, it's not meaningful. And I would tell them, I'm like, you need to understand what's going on in video games. There are deep stories, there are deep messages, they're complex. If your kids are spending hours and hours playing video games, there is a reason. They're not stupid people. They're smart
Yeah,
people, and they're deep. And I almost never convinced any of my peers that that's what was happening. But
yeah,
I believe in you guys.
yeah. We'll keep the fight alive. We're
Yeah.
finally the generation that is becoming adult, and we can still advocate for video games.
Yes, it's good.
Yeah, that's one thing that I think always bummed me out that there wasn't ever, that the Halo movie never came to be because I always wanted to show people in my life who didn't care about video games how amazing the story of Halo was. And I could never quite, I just sounded too nerdy, too excited about it as I would try to explain it to them. But sadly, it never came to fruition. And then, the Halo TV show follows some other kind of storyline.
I mean, I remember doing this all the way back with, Final Fantasy 3 or 4. I forget what, I think it was 3. Just trying to explain to people, like, yeah, it might look really rinky-dink and kind of stupid, and it's 8-bit and or maybe 16-bit. I can't remember what it was at the time. But the
Yeah.
stories were really compelling, and it's just like, wow, this is really interesting. These stories are going to get better and deeper, and human beings are creative and they're making great stuff, and that's what's attracting people to it. It's not just twitchy, mindless entertainment, but
Yeah. Yeah, I
and,
like
and
to imagine, when people first had just books and stories, they'd tell themselves that when, Thespis and those original actors started like doing stories, they were like, no, you
yeah,
watch this guy and he fakes
yeah,
it, and it's great. And they couldn't get people along on the
yeah.
ride.
Oh
So
no, yes.
we have time. But I'll go ahead and get right into it. My first question is, when did you first start playing music?
Um, from my earliest memories, we had a piano in the house, and I think I used to, walk by and put my hand up to where that keyboard was, and just hearing the sound of the piano, I think was always fascinating to me. So my mom, from the time I was 4 years old, would encourage me just to sit there at the piano and doodle around and make things up. And so I started taking lessons formally when I was 7.
Hmm.
So I feel like music's always been part of my life.
When you started writing music, was it more classical, just music, or were you writing music with lyrics?
I did not write music until I was 19. So I was a piano performance major. I went to college, auditioned to get in at the conservatory, and it was going to be a piano performance major, and I was for 2.5 years.
Hmm.
Um, I had a band also that was outside the university, right? So it was like, let's play cool music, and I was figuring stuff out, fusion and prog rock and a
Yeah.
bunch of stuff like that. And at one point, these are pretty complex, intricate songs. And the drummer asked me, why don't you write something instead of just, you have a really good ear. You're figuring all this music out for us and teaching it to us. Why don't you try writing something? And it was like a light had been turned on in my head. It was just like nobody had said that I could write music. Nobody had
Yeah.
actually given me that permission. None of the teachers I had ever had that as part of their teaching or training or even their own background.
Hmm.
And so I immediately went up the stairs. The band was rehearsing in my parents' basement, which was a very nice basement, by the way.
Yeah.
Uh, so I went upstairs and I thought, well, what if I was to write something? And I immediately wrote something that I brought back down and taught to the two guitar players and the bass player and the drummer, and they liked it and I liked it and it sounded cool. And so at that moment, I'm like, this is way better than playing other people's music and having to trying to be perfect and memorize and be in piano competitions and that stuff just as a future was not interesting to me. And but being able to write music opened up the whole world for me. So I switched.
Yeah. I'm as you're explaining this, recently I was doing research on you before this interview and I found this gem of a photo with you with this rocker hair. You looked like you were, from some 80s band, Foreigner or
Sure.
something like that. Hadn't ever pictured you like that, but now I'm seeing this very specific Marty O'Donnell coming down the stairs of
Yes.
the basement with his masterpiece. That's
That's
fantastic
pretty
though.
accurate. That's probably how I looked. Yes.
Yeah. So when did you know that this would be a career for you?
Well, it's funny. I never really thought about the concept of career. It was more like I went to the dean of the conservatory and said, I want to switch to be a music composition major. And he
Hmm.
basically said, you've already done 2.5 years as piano performance. You don't have enough time to switch and make it all the way through as a composition major and take all the required courses. And he says, so you probably won't be able to get a degree, in the 4 year time period that you were planning on. And I just said to him, I said, well, it's not important to me to get a degree. I'm going to be a rock star anyway.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was
So
my
that's fine.
attitude. That was at age 19, 20 years old or whatever, that my planning for the future was, I'll just be a rock star. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that always when I was, because I wanted to be a filmmaker growing up, or be an actor in films, if nothing else. And I did theater in high school, and I remember they would always talk about projecting, and if you're a film actor, you could do that, but you really can't get away with that in theater. And I was always, well, that's fine. I don't have to learn that because I'm going to be a movie actor anyway, so it's
Right. There you
fine.
go. Yeah. Well, I
Um,
mean, you don't let go of your dreams. It's just your dreams might mutate or they might, it might turn into something else. So
right.
I was able to have, a very successful career as a composer in different places, like a composer for TV commercials, a composer for movies and, all sorts of different things, and then games.
And didn't you
So,
compose for video games? I was about to ask
yeah, yeah,
at some point in time. So how did
exactly.
that come about? Where did you kind of show up on the video game scene? Was that ever planned?
That was never planned, especially because when I was always playing video games the whole time. So I was got into computer games and then Nintendo came out with the Nintendo Entertainment System, the first one.
Hmm.
And I really fell in love with the way the games were, and I loved what that was, but it was never intriguing to me from a production standpoint. I never thought I would actually be writing music or producing audio because it was so low res.
Hmm.
Everything was just very low res. You probably didn't even have sound on your computer back in the early days playing I forget, Infocom games,
Hmm.
which are text adventure games. So it was just text adventures, which were cool. And then Nintendo, Zelda and Mario, and it was like those were a blast, but they didn't have any. There was nothing attractive from a music and audio production standpoint. And
Yeah.
little did I know how quickly the technical bar would move and grow. It happened so fast. It almost happened faster than I was aware of, even though I was playing.
Yeah.
Myst came out in 1993, and I got a chance to play it with one of the, it was an 18-year-old kid at the time who was an intern for them during the summer. Happened to be a son of a friend of mine, and he wanted to show me what he was working on, and he did, and it was the beta version of Myst, which is Probably a computer game you're not too aware of. I'm not sure. It's
No,
that.
I know of it. I have never played it
Okay.
though.
You should try it. If you can imagine, in 1993 when I saw it, and I saw it before anybody else did. I saw it a couple months before it came out. It was so revolutionary. It had a cinematic feel to it. The graphics were gorgeous. The story was interesting. There was acting. There was real sound design, real music recorded, real voiceover,
Hmm.
real actors. I mean, it was just this combination of things where I'm like, oh my gosh, it's happened and I missed the boat. I got to
Yeah.
jump on this as quickly as I can. I really thought I had missed it. I thought I was just maybe, the train was going by and I had just grabbed onto the back of the caboose, hopefully being able to do something in the industry.
Yeah. And how old were you at this time?
I was old.
Yeah.
I probably was, let me think, 93. I would have been 38 years old.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about
Oh,
that because I was recently listening to I don't know. I guess you're familiar with Rooster Teeth and Red versus
oh
Blue
yeah,
and all
yeah.
that. Okay,
Are you
okay.
kidding? Come on. I
Well,
I I'm one of the guys who started them.
that's right. That's right.
I saw them right at the beginning, and I talked to Bernie almost immediately and encouraged him and made sure that, we at Bungie had their back and made sure Microsoft wasn't going to go after them for copyright infringement. And
Yeah.
then we worked with them to make sure that they could. We almost fixed the bug that caused them to be able to do the look down head nod
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah.
It was a
Thank
bug.
God you didn't.
And so we were going to fix it. And then I said, well, wait a minute. I mean, I don't think I was the only one talking about it, but inside Bungie, we were like, we can't screw up the RVB guys. We got to let Rooster Teeth keep doing this. So we actually, I forget how we did it. We put something in so they could keep doing it, but we sort of fixed the part that bugged us about it. That was,
Yeah.
was
Well,
a
yeah, in the
mistake.
first one it was just like by accident when you look all the way down, but in the other ones it's like a series of buttons. If you hit just right, then you can kind
Yes,
of
and
unlock it.
I think we came up with that for them specifically so they could keep doing the machinima I mean because there was a couple of things that happened right around the time when we released. We were releasing a lot of sort of fun videos even prior to launching Halo in 2001. So
Hmm.
we already had a small community of fans, and we would give them promotional videos and different things to show them what we were doing.
Yeah.
So it was not all that unusual, especially because we had done Myth and Oni and some other things. So
Yeah.
we were, you know,
Had
helping
some
the
traction
fans
already.
community. Yeah, but to see almost immediately, the first thing that came in was within weeks of releasing Halo was the Warthog jump video. If you've ever seen that.
Hmm.
If you haven't, you should go look it up. It was made by a guy named Randall Glass, and it was this combination of tricks, uh, what we call Chucky physics, because Chucky Goff did the physics for Halo One, and this guy Randall figured out how to collect enough grenades to launch the Warthog into the air and launch Marines into the air, and it's a hilarious video. He put music to it. He did some very clever editing, and as
Yeah.
soon as I saw that, I thought, oh, this is fascinating. It's not just a game, it is a playground for people if they want to do other things,
Oh yeah.
and then make videos out of it. And this is before there was any sort of easy capturing of gameplay and making videos. Randall was pretty smart on how to work with this stuff.
Yeah.
And when we saw that come out, I was just like, okay, this is going to be interesting. There's going to be something that extends the life of our products that happens because the fans take over. And Rooster Teeth was not long after that.
Do you think that was kind of the point where you realized, Halo was going to be as big as it was?
Um, no, we had it was a slow build. We had been building our fan base at Bungie, and we knew that Halo was going to be big, and
Hmm.
we knew now that we had Microsoft and the Xbox behind us, it was going to be really big, which means it could hit like 800,000 units sold, and a year after we shipped, people might even still be playing it.
Yeah.
That's how big we thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And that was like, to think that was, you know, beyond belief. It's like that will never happen, but maybe on this one it could.
Hmm.
So to still be talking about Halo, you know, 20 25 years later,
Little unexpected.
it just is completely unexpected. It took off to a degree that none of us anticipated. We thought it was going to be successful, but success meant something much smaller scale back then. So
Yeah. Well, and I think that had to do with, like you said, it wasn't just a campaign and it wasn't just a multiplayer, but it was that and, you know, the beginnings of this whole new field of media with machinima or things that you could just play around with that just give it so much life after the fact.
yeah, the people who do the other part that I wasn't expecting was the, you know, break the game tricks kind of thing. We're like, can we get on top of this tower, and can we get a warthog on top of the tower and then get out of the map and do this other crazy thing, you know, from speed running to crazy tricks. um those were things we just weren't anticipating at all, and has kept the community sort of fed and alive. And of course, we threw Easter eggs throughout the
Yeah.
products every chance we got. I was always a big advocate of putting mysterious stuff in, even if it didn't have explicit meaning.
Yeah. Famously, I remember just hours and hours spent at my friend's house trying to
Yeah.
get on top of the right guy to throw the grenade at the right time just to see some monkey up in the woods in
Yes,
complete low res. Yeah.
that was yeah, that was the Lato Marcus Lato gorilla
Yeah.
family.
Another thing that I think made it so popular and that causes me to continue to bring it up to people is the music, obviously. And I remember my wife specifically, when I first met her, our very first conversation, we went and got coffee and we're talking about a whole array of things. And at one point she's talking to me about music and I was like, "Oh, well, of course you've heard the Halo soundtrack." And she didn't grow up playing video games, so she's like, you know, what, why are you bringing this up? I imagine she's thinking of, like, you know, Mario music essentially. And I'm going, no, 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 this is some of the best music I've ever heard. It's like, it's beautiful. And it's, I mean, it's like orchestral and it's like this old Gregorian chant. And so I just remember showing her this Halo music at this coffee shop and trying to explain it to her. And in the back of my head, I'm like, if she doesn't get how cool this is, this may seem a little bit forward. I'm like, no, you must listen to this right now. You've got to understand where I'm coming from.
No, how are you playing it for her? You're
Just on
young.
on Spotify is where I was playing it for her.
Spotify on with headphones and a iPhone or what?
Just on my iPhone speakers, yeah.
Wow.
So
Okay,
not
well,
probably not the ideal
it was certainly not the
form of
ideal, but
listening
it
to it.
like it, and she still was your girlfriend and fiance after that.
Yeah, she continued talking to me, so it worked out. Yeah,
That's good.
you saved my marriage, basically, is what I'm trying to tell you. Um, no, but I was gonna ask you, like, when I think of this one specific story that what's his name, Carrie Elways talked about. You know, The Princess Bride was originally kind of a failure and became this cult classic. And he said, you know, years had passed, and there's this moment where he was in a coffee shop, and he said, you know, can I get this, 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 and this? And the woman goes, as you wish. And he's like, he started realizing, like, oh crap, this is starting to pick up. So I was wondering if there was a moment for you with the Halo soundtrack or the Halo main theme specifically, where you started to go, oh my gosh, everyone knows this song.
Well, let's see. I don't remember exactly. It was very, very early, but I started the phenomenon before it became a meme on YouTube and Twitter and stuff. I started hearing people sing the Halo Monk chant as
Hmm.
the, you know, and what I've always found fascinating is that especially boys, teenage boys, do not like to sing. They do
Yeah,
not want to sing. They don't want to join choir. Like I was in choir, of course. I was a musician, and I thought it was stupid not to sing. I think singing is
yeah,
spectacular. But most teenage boys do not want to sing. And you know, if they're first-person shooter fans, you know, the singing would be the furthest thing from their mind. But they'll all sing the Halo chant or make an attempt at singing it. And then I realized at that point, okay, this is going to have some legs. This has gotten into their heads. It's become, well, I mean, I've heard people call it the gamers' national anthem, which is very
yeah.
fun to hear that said. But when I started hearing people sing it, or I could start singing it at a game developers conference talk, and I could say, well, I'm the guy who wrote this piece, and I start singing it, and then people in the audience would finish it, and then I
Yeah.
thought, okay, all right, this has had some impact.
Well, yeah, when you say teenage boys, it's funny. In high school, for me specifically, that's when I realized it because I grew up playing Halo, and I had tons of friends that didn't play Halo or play video games. But in high school, if we were ever in some open area, the second they were like, wow, there's cool acoustics in here, everyone jumped into, oh, and you're like, it's
Oh,
just we
yeah,
know immediately what to do. Like it's innate in us.
yeah, that's
Um,
cool.
but yeah, beyond, I know you're obviously very, very involved with the music and all of the sound that came out of the speakers as the audio director. But I
Right.
was curious, how involved specifically were you with the story of the kind of original Bungie games?
Well, let's see. For the first Halo, it's interesting. I've been looking at some threads recently talking about who came up with the idea of the Spartans, who came up with, Mjolnir armor and stuff. And, I did meet Eric Nyland and Eric Troutman, while we were working on Halo 1, but we were concentrating on doing Halo 1, the first Halo, and getting
Hmm.
that shipped. Um, but we were, the scripts were flying around and the story was being molded. And, I remember even back in Chicago talking about the flood with the guys, and then coming up with as a group, we would talk about what needed to happen with the flood and how that needed to be so secret. We could never reveal to anyone
Yeah.
the sort of switch, halfway through the game. We wanted that just to be a complete shock to people. So I remember, saying, supporting that and talking about it and talking about how we were going to try to make that impactful. I wasn't, Jason Jones was primarily the main story guy for Halo 1. It
Hmm.
was mostly a lot of his construction of things. And then Joe Staten got more involved. Marcus certainly was involved. Jamie Griesmer. We all sort of would be sort of around the story and suggest things. And then of course there would be you have to understand how development works. I mean, you don't have to understand, but I wish people could understand. It's never a straight line. You have like, wouldn't this be cool? Yeah, but what if this happens? Oh, that'd be cool too. Oh, well, let's start working on something that starts moving in that direction. Oh, well, here's an outline of the different levels that we're going to have in this game. Um,
Yeah, you
I think
mentioned
we
Eric
went,
Nyland. I was curious how you guys kind of felt about the books as people were writing a story kind of parallel to yours at the
yeah.
same time.
Well, Eric, I love Eric. He's a super cool guy, and he's really talented. We didn't have a lot of interaction with him at the time. Well, like he got the gist of what we were making. He got whatever what we called our Halo Bible, which was like, well, here's the lore, here's the backstory, here's what we
Hmm.
think it is. We knew that he was going to be doing this thing. He knew that we were starting the story after the fall of Reach, but it was really kind of like, well, what does that mean? Well, Reach is this human planet, and the Covenant took over, and now we've escaped from there, and Halo starts. you know, so there
Yeah.
wasn't a whole lot of deep lore about it,
Hmm.
and I don't know who came up with the idea of let's have this sort of prequel novel, this novel that comes out with the game or just before the game. Did it come out like a couple weeks before the game, something like that?
I want to say it did.
I mean, he turned that around really fast. It was pretty much Microsoft's marketing idea to have this book that would come out prior to the game. And I don't remember who made the decision that the game should be about the fall of Reach.
Hmm.
But somehow I'm pretty sure that was a group decision that like he should make a book based on what happened just before the actions of Halo, the story of Halo starts.
Yeah. I
And
was always curious. I was always curious how much what informed what. Who was kind of, oh, well, this book that wasn't written by us has all these great ideas, or let's use it, or if it was
Well,
like you said from
this is I'd love to actually sit down with Eric and I would like to sit down with Eric and Joe Staten and Jamie Griesmer, who would also be interested in this. He would be an interesting person to have. The four of us talking about this would be interesting. Some other
yeah,
people too. Paul
let's make it
Rudd.
happen, Marty.
Yeah, let's make it happen. Let's make it happen. Because I think as time goes by, I have forgotten who came up with what.
Yeah.
I saw somebody the other day say that the Spartan program didn't exist until Eric Nyland invented it, and I thought, really? I thought we were talking about Spartans while we were making Halo, but it's possible we weren't.
Hmm.
We certainly, after the success of The Fall of Reach as a book, and then the success of Halo One, we decided to make Halo 2, and we thought, okay, well, we got to get serious now about the lore, and
Yeah.
somehow that started to coalesce. Another guy, Rob McLeese, was heavily involved in some of the backstory and lore and stuff like that. Rob would be great to have him talk about what he remembers. So
Yeah.
there's a bunch
I
of
was
guys who were there at the beginning, and we should see if we can, figure out what the order of inventions were and
let's
who
do
did
it, man.
what.
Let's figure it
Let's do
out.
it. All right.
No, I was also curious. I know obviously you weren't the head writer of it, but being sort of involved in the story, and this was Bungie's baby a little bit. I was curious, like, how much you knew about when they announced Halo 4, 5, and 6 coming out as this new trilogy, and oh, they're going to continue this story after we had kind of closed it a little bit. I was wondering what your
Well,
initial thoughts were on
let's
that.
just clarify this. I was the audio director, and I worked heavily with the writers and the scripts, and I cast the actors and directed the actors, and led the team that did all the audio and music. But I was never a writer. If
Hmm.
anything, I would maybe change a line here or there at a table read because it didn't sound natural, or
Hmm.
I would suggest lines and stuff like that. But in terms of writing the story, the most detailed I ever got in that was Halo 3. And by that time, it was because we were so much it was so much being written by committee, and it just didn't have much soul. It had no depth to it, the story that we
Yeah.
were working on.
Which is so fascinating
And
to
I
hear you say that,
Yeah.
because I grew up with such a love for Halo 1, 2, and 3. As a child, I was just like, these are perfect. These are perfect stories. And then going back and hearing, like, oh, yeah, we'd never wanted to make Halo 2. And we thought, well, we could do this. And then it continued on. And I'm like, but it was perfect. Like, how,
Yeah.
it seems so natural to lead into those
Well,
stories at the
that's
time.
what I was going to say about the reality of actual game development, and I think it's the same in if you look at the behind the scenes of some of your favorite movies, like some of the movies that almost never got made or would have been entirely different if this one decision hadn't been made.
Yeah.
It almost seems serendipitous. But that's the way it was for us too. It's like it grew, and then we were respectful of what we had done, so we wanted to build on what we had already done. So
Yeah.
to build on what you had done already is a smart thing to do rather than to abandon what you had done in the past. But even Halo 2 was going to be the end. I mean, Halo 2 was it. We were like, well, that's it, Halo 2, and then we're done.
Yeah.
And then we were the ones who realized we couldn't finish Halo 2. So we had to end on a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
And
So you
then
had
it's like,
Halo
oh, well,
2, 2.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So now we needed Halo 3. And suddenly I remember it saying, oh, okay. So this is the grand finale to an epic trilogy. I said that as though we were always planning on an epic trilogy.
Hmm.
We weren't. We were planning on Halo 1 and then move back to Chicago.
Yeah.
And then Halo 2, well, we better do Halo 2 because there's a bunch of stuff we didn't do, but that'll be the end. And then we weren't capable of finishing the story that we had written for Halo 2,
Right.
but we couldn't finish it. I mean, basically, there would have just been one level for Halo 3. So when we had to sort of start from scratch with Halo 3 and say, okay, this has got to be bigger and grander and more glorious, and that's how Halo 3 came around. But it's like, yeah, in hindsight, it looks like we had planned all these different things, and
Right.
You know, if it feels like we were foreshadowing in Halo 1 something that would happen in Halo 3, there was no foreshadowing as an intention. It's when you're making Halo 3, you go back and say, "Oh, hey, this cool thing happened in Halo 1, or this piece of music happened, or this dialogue happened. We could bring it back." And now that makes it more impactful. It makes it more, it has gravitas now. And it feels
Yeah.
like in hindsight that we planned the whole thing wonderfully. That's
Yeah.
just not the way it was.
Well, so then here's the question. I
Sure.
assume you've heard there's many, many rumors going around about a Halo reboot. Have you heard of this?
Yes, yes, yeah. Yeah, I have heard.
Okay. And so I was going to ask you if you were at the helm of this, if you were in charge of this Halo reboot and now you knew what the story generally would be, what would you change? How would you make it different knowing what's to come?
Oh, wow. Well, Marcus has already sort of weighed in on this, and I like what he was saying, which is like, let's go back in the archives and pull out all the weapons that we cut and the vehicles we cut and the levels we cut. Remember, we had the titles of our levels were like A, B, C, D, right? And then we'd have A1, A2, A3. That we would say, well, there might be something in between. So for computers purposes, it'll be A10, so A10, and then A20. So in case we needed to, we could do A15, which would come between A10 and A20.
Yeah.
That was why we did it. So we had these plans laid out, which is why I still think of some of the original Halo levels with those like B30. I think of B30, which is that's the silent cartographer. We didn't have the name silent cartographer while we were working on it. It was just called B30. But I don't believe there was a B20. I think B20 was cut.
Yeah.
So it would be fun to go back and say, "Oh, what was B20 again? Oh yeah, we should bring all those levels that we had planned on having that would flesh out the story better." And this would be the problem with it, of course, though, because people are so in love with what they remember or what they've heard a million times. So we don't have like dialogue for B20. I think B20 is one of them. We don't have dialogue that, if you go back to rescuing Captain Keyes from the prison, and all of a sudden he just starts spewing exposition. We as a joke we called him Captain Exposition because
Yeah.
he it was because an entire level had been cut. So he had to just sort of do a synopsis of what the level would have given us or given the player as a story. He had to just give us a synopsis, which is why he's saying, I overheard them saying
Yeah.
they call this Halo. And we're like, it's like, what do you mean? You overheard who? What are they? What,
Right.
none of that makes a lot of sense
Right.
from a
You
story
overheard the
standpoint.
alien language that we can't understand. Yeah.
Yes.
It's fascinating.
And they call it Halo. So anyway, um, yeah, we had moments where we just had to have the actors do exposition because there were gaps in the story. So
Yeah.
Marcus's idea, which I think is wonderful, would be like, let's go back and flesh out the story, the entire thing that we thought would be cool. Would probably make the game twice as long, if not more. But we'd have to also, hire, I don't know, we could still hire a lot of the same actors, but there'd be actors we'd have to replace. So it would cause people mental distress to hear the wrong voices coming out of
Yeah,
the
that's true.
characters. So,
Luckily, Steve Downs' voice has only gotten crispier with age, so
yes, Steve
he'll
Downs and Jen
always
Taylor
be
would
there
do it in
for
a
us.
heartbeat. I think we still get Pete Stacker, who is the Tim Dodabo was 343 Guilty Spark, and Pete Stacker was Captain Keyes, and Sergeant Stacker. There might be a couple of people though that are beloved that wouldn't be available, so that'd be difficult.
This is the big question. This is hitting me now.
Now,
Since
by
you're
the way,
not in
before you go on, I just want to say that I don't think I'm a fan of this project.
of the reboot,
The reboot and with the Marcus and Marty, like we're back and Joe's back and Jamie's back and we're going to really do it right this time. The
yeah,
pressure would be insane. Number one, like
yeah,
how can you? There's enough. accidental genius that happened in Halo 1 that like nobody's really responsible for. And to create that again and not have it be disappointing, um, I think it's better just to have people imagine how good it would be. It's sort of like when you talk about, well, I want the, 1968 New York Knicks to play the 1985 Chicago Bulls. It's like, okay, that's a cool concept. You can think about it, you can argue about it. Um,
But it's better in your head.
it's better in your head. That's all
Hmm.
I'm saying. Okay.
Yeah, I feel that. What was your favorite Halo to work on?
I think ODST might be my favorite one to actually
Hmm.
work on. It was back to a small team. Halo 1 was a lot of fun to work on because the expectations were way lower. We knew what we had. We thought we had
Hmm.
something really cool, but we were making it up as we went along, and the hardware and the technology was coming in hot and was not reliable, and we didn't know if these things were going to work. So there was a lot of anxiety while we were working on Halo 1.
Hmm.
Halo 2 had a horrible crunch. Um, Halo 3 was pretty satisfying, but the nice thing about Halo 3 ODST was we were back to a small team of under 30 people working on it.
Yeah.
While you know 150 people were working on Reach simultaneously. I was working on both, of course.
Yeah.
Um, but ODST had this smaller team. It was a different kind of story. It was a different approach. And we were working with technology that was not changing on a daily basis. We were using the Halo 3 engine. So up until then, Halo 1 was a brand new engine. Halo 2 we'd ripped all the guts out of Halo 1 and rewrote the code, and then that didn't work. And I mean, it was just a scary thing.
Yeah.
Halo 3 was once again all new tech. Um, some things were ported over, but there was a lot of new stuff in the technology. But we were able to, the artists were all able to relax. All the creative people were able to kind of relax with ODST because we knew nothing was going to change underneath us,
Yeah.
technically.
It's funny because I initially missed ODST. I grew up with 1, 2, and 3, and then I was what they call a Reach kid. That was the first game that I pre-ordered. I had it on the first day, and I
Okay.
remember being
Yeah.
blown away by Forge World, especially, and
Wow.
I
Yeah.
loved that you could play with your own Spartan in the campaign. But yeah, I remember I had a poster of ODST actually in my room, and in my old YouTube videos, you can see this giant poster that I think my dad got for me. And I thought it was the coolest looking poster.
Yeah.
But my thought at the time was like, I'm very brand loyal. And because
Sure.
Master Chief wasn't in it, I was like,
No Master
I don't want
Chief. Why
anything to
should I
do with
play
that.
that? Yeah.
Yeah. And so I ended up playing it actually. I think my first time was probably in college. So several years ago. Um, I went through it was like I'm gonna beat all of the games on Legendary. I'm finally gonna go through and do it. So I had the Master Chief collection. I was going through and I was like, you know what? It's not gonna feel complete unless I do ODST. So I went through ODST and I was like, this is a fantastic game. Why have I been missing it for all of these years? Like the
Exactly.
music was fantastic, and I can't believe how much I was able to connect with the characters, though I had never known anything about them before. So
Mhm.
um, bravo on
Well,
being able
thanks.
to get us over there.
Well, it was a small team. Paul Bertone and Joe Staten led the team. That was Joe's story. It was Paul's design. Um, yeah, there was just so many things that came together on ODST that I really, really enjoyed. The Sadie story was a great way to sort of pad out the time and do something completely different, having this sort of graphic novel story playing if you wanted it to. Like you didn't have to find all those things, and you didn't have to go that way. But I think we rewarded you pretty well if you spent the time to figure
Oh
that
yeah.
stuff out. And it was a nice, and the whole Dante's Inferno thing was so much fun. It was pretty obvious. We were everything about it was very obvious. It was not, an allegory, or it was not something that you had to like really be smart to figure out. But it was fun to have it in there, and there's a lot of just little hidden gems inside of ODST that I'm glad we did.
Hmm. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's interesting because a lot of people, like a lot of the fans, especially in the press, the game press, they were like, "Wait a minute, what is this expansion pack with no Master Chief? Like,
Hmm.
why would anybody want to play as a not as a enhanced super soldier. I mean, Master Chief is the reason we all play Halo. Why would we want to play something that's not that? And we were like, well, give it a try to see. We're
Yeah.
telling stories in, in our universe and our engine, and we wanted to show that it could be broader and deeper than just a one one thing, Master Chief only.
Yeah, well, that's part of the reason I'm so glad I discovered it much later because I've played all the Halo campaigns over and over and over, and so I really haven't played through them as much more recently, just because I know them so well. Especially when I went
Sure.
through on Legendary, it was like,
Oh
okay,
yeah,
now I know
that's a
every
grind.
corner of everything. Yeah, especially Halo 2 Legendary. I was like,
I beat Halo 2 Legendary without ever killing a Jackal sniper.
really?
No, I'm
I was
lying.
about to say I'm gonna need some evidence for that, Marty. I'm gonna need a recording. Um, anyway,
Jackal snipers was horrible. By the way, yeah, I mean, the thing I would say to you, because you're young and I don't know if you've done it this way, but if your main experience with the Halo series, especially more recently, is
mhm,
playing it on a Xbox One version, the newer Xbox with Master Chief Collection, you are kind of not really getting the full
Marty,
what
I
Bungie
started on
experience.
an original Xbox. Trust
Okay,
me. I
okay,
had
all right,
I didn't even have any what do you call it? Backwards compatibility. It was the original
okay, okay.
Xbox. My cousin actually, Andrew, he played Halo before me and he got a 360, and so he just gave me his Xbox. He was like, "I don't use this
Oh,
anymore. You can
excellent.
have it."
Okay, cool.
And so he gave me the only games I had on it, I believe, were Fable, Halo 1 and Halo 2. And that's it.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to know you played Halo 1 and 2 on the original Xbox where they were
Mhm.
intended, because then you got the entire experience the way we designed it, with the loading screens, with the end, end movies, and the legendary movies and the credits, the way we flowed into the credits and flowed out of the credits, like all that stuff was part of the environment of telling the story and
Yeah.
presenting these games. And I play it on Master Chief Collection, and I'm like, it's jarring to me to play
Yeah.
these games on the Master Chief Collection, because I really know it so well the way we designed it. And there are decisions that Microsoft 343 made in terms of porting it to the Master Chief Collection that
Mhm.
makes absolutely no sense to me. I'm
Mhm.
like, why did you do that? Why did you bother? Why did you cut that part? Why did you truncate that little bit? Why did you change that mix? Why did you change that firing rate? Why did you change that sound effect? Like, there are things that they did that's only on the Master Chief Collection that a lot of people think that's what we made.
Right.
And for the most part, I would say, yeah, 94% of what we made for Halo 1, 2, and 3 is on the Master Chief Collection, but it's not the way we intended it. Like, it's
Yeah.
just not right. And I don't understand why I do that. I don't get it.
Well, to this day, I still play on. I know that this is not the same for you, obviously, but I
Oh, it's
still play on
okay.
the
No.
old graphics for
Sure.
Master Chief Collection for the original Halo. Although Halo 2, I will say, I do play on the new Halo 2 graphics because
Yeah,
they're
it's pretty.
insane.
Halo 2 is way better, improved graphics. The
Yeah.
anniversary Halo
It's
2 is
sad to me the
better.
music is different, though. I mean, that's obviously a big part of it. I have to switch though. I have to switch because my Xbox can't even really handle. There's certain levels with the flood in Halo 2 where there's
Really?
so many different like things in the air that are going by that it will start slowing down that I have to go to the old
Really?
graphics. Yeah,
Oh,
it's
wow,
just
that's
it's
too bad.
so much that it can't handle. I remember thinking because I bought a new Xbox Series X, like, what's wrong? Is this broken? Like I just got it, and I went on Reddit, and everyone else was like, yeah, you just have to go on the old graphics for this part. It's just too much.
Okay, well, see, that's, yeah, whatever. I don't want to talk about that. That's too bad.
Yeah.
That shouldn't happen. And frankly, I'm not going to call it retconning, because it's not like there's enough of that with Halo 4, 5, and Infinite. Um, but I wish there was a easier way for me to say, hey, if you want to experience Halo 1, 2, 3, ODST, and Reach, the five Halos that I made with the Bungie that I know, um, if you want to experience it, here's how to do it. And there
Mhm.
is no way to do that. There's no good way to say, Here's the place to go to do it. Because it's even hard to find an original Xbox and get surround sound and get the right media cables and find a TV that still will look good
Yeah.
with not HDMI and all of that stuff. So yeah, it's just one of those weird things. Is like I thought I
So now
was
we go to the reboot.
yeah, well, okay.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just
But
kidding.
see, I mean, I could see the fun part of seeing a reboot would be just taking advantage of all the technology that's available and 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 just doing it right. But it's like it would be so dangerous. You'd have to be so careful of you know goring having whose ox is being gored, right? I mean, like what sacred cows are being sacrificed for the new
Yeah.
thing. There are things people just love the way it is, and they don't want it to change. So
Right.
it's tough. It's hard. I mean, I
Yeah.
found that out when we had to do some voiceover replacements, where we had to replace an actor or two from Halo 2 to Halo 3. And it was like, well, 3 years have gone by, maybe nobody will notice. Holy mackerel. There's still, I still have people swearing at me for not hiring Michael Wincott as Prophet of Truth. I mean, that was out of our control. Like Michael Wincott did
Yeah.
not want to work with us again. He didn't want to work for Microsoft again, believe it or not.
Hmm.
So and I thought we got you know the guy who played Zod from Superman, Terrence Stamp, is a great, famous British actor. I thought,
Yeah.
well, yeah, people will love Terrence Stamp. He's so wonderful. And no, people hated Terrence Stamp's Prophet of Truth in Halo 3. I'm not saying everybody hated it, but like a lot of people were like, Michael Wincott was so much better. And I'm not saying he was better, but I'm saying if that's the voice you have in your head and that's the character that you believe is the Prophet of Truth, you can't get away with changing that. It makes people really upset. It's the same reason why it took 343 a little more time to figure this out. I had warned them because I had heard through the grapevine that they were going to replace Cortana and Steve Downs, Jen Taylor and Steve
Oh
Downs
man, I
as the
cannot imagine.
and they had actually recorded of new voices for Halo 4.
Hmm.
And I said, you guys, you're not going to get away with it. Trust me, it's not going to work. It doesn't matter if you even think you have better actors or anything. The fans will not accept it. And
Right.
they actually went into some testing, and the fans that they tested it with were just like, you cannot do this. So
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
went
Big
back.
big shocker on that one, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Um,
there was a bit of a waste of money and problems. Yeah.
what's your most meaningful memory of your time with Halo?
Yeah, I've talked about this before, but I think it was Halo 1. It was we gotten to the point where we started to believe we might be able to hit the deadline. We're in September. We have the last big hurdle is to do all the cinematics, which there were 33 cinematics, and we had 3 days to do them. So we had 3 days. Joe had scripted the cinematics into the engine, so now we actually, Jay Wineland and I, he's the audio design, and I was the music design. I was the director, so I was like telling and talking with Jay about stuff that I wanted in there. But I said to Jay, I said, okay, Jay, sound design, we got to do 11 a day. We've got 3 days to do 33, so we got to do 11 a day. And the first day we got done, I had scored 11 cinematics. He had done sound design for 11 cinematics. We saw them in the engine. We were like, great, we can do this. And that was September 10, 2001.
Hmm.
So, of course, the world changed the next day. But the guys at Bungie were so tunnel vision focused that everybody came in to work on the game on September 11th.
Yeah.
And I came in and told Jay, you got to go home, be with your family. I went into the conference room, a bunch of Bungie guys were there, and I'm like, guys, you don't realize what's going on. Go home. You know, we don't know if the world is coming to an end yet. So this is not important. If we can't figure out another way to get the deadline extended after something like this happens. It's not worth doing this. So everybody went home.
Hmm.
So, but then we all came in the next day because it was basically it was like we don't want the terrorists to win and
Right.
cause us to like not actually do what we want to do. So, it's not like the dust had settled, but we knew the world wasn't actually coming to an end. It's just the world had changed.
Hmm.
But so on September 12th, we came back in and we got a day extension and finished
Yeah.
the 33 on the 12th and 13th. So
Well,
that's just emblazoned in my mind as a big moment.
so then I guess I have one more small follow up question to that, given
Sure.
your story. This has continually been a question, and people have gone back and forth, but how was the story of Halo 2 influenced by that, by September 11th?
Well, that's interesting. It's hard to say that anything after September 11th wasn't in some way influenced by September 11th. But
True.
like we already had the major, pieces of the universe in place. We had the jihadist religious fanatic cult of called the Covenant. And we had the good guys, the American Marines. I mean the United Nations Space Command or whatever they were. Um, so we had these things that you could already say reflected the reality of the political climate at the time. But we'd already had that in place, and maybe some of that was in place because you know those were the kinds of things that were happening. It wasn't like September 11th was the first terrorist attack. It wasn't like Islamic extremists hadn't been doing terrorism already.
Hmm.
But I don't remember that ever being a thought or a one-to-one thing. It was more archetypal. These are the kinds of things that happen in the world, and what if this is what we, base our story on? I don't remember anything specific changing for Halo 2 because of September 11th, other than from a negative standpoint, when we had come up with the character of the dervish. And I've
Hmm.
talked about this before, but the dervish after we went all the way through it. We had gotten clearance from Microsoft. Everybody had cleared the scripts. I made sure the scripts were clean and clear and approved before I cast or hired actors. Because once you hire an actor and you go through the process of recording everybody and then editing it and putting it in the game, that's how late it was. The game was all the actors were done. All the voice was in the game in Halo 2.
Hmm.
And then the edict came down from Microsoft saying, we can't call him the dervish. You guys got to come up with a a name for him. And I was like, that's insane. That's impossible. We cannot do that. We don't have the time. This is stupid. I don't care what your reasons are. You had your shot at making us change it. We should have changed it 3 months ago. I was livid, but I there was nothing I could do about it. So we had to figure out how to change it to the Arbiter. And
Yeah.
I always thought the Arbiter sounded clunky. It's funny now. I mean, you think of you
I
know
can't imagine it with any other name
yeah,
at this
you
point.
can. It's got to be the Arbiter and the RB and all the fun things like who knows what life would have been like if it had been the dervish the whole time. Who knows? Maybe we would have been attacked by some extremist at some point. But anyway,
Yeah.
in my head, I still think of him as the dervish because that's the way it was when we worked on it. So that was the main thing that I think September 11th caused us to be sensitive about was the name of the arbiter. We had it couldn't be the dervish,
Yeah.
which is weird because if you know do you know what the dervish is, like, do you know what Muslim religion thing it is from?
As far as I know, is I know about the whirling dervish, which is
That's
different.
what it is. Yeah.
Oh, it
The
is?
whirling
Okay.
dervish is the whirling dervish is I don't know if they're priests or if they're just part, and I think it's mostly uh, Turkish. I think it's from Turkey for the most part, or Morocco or
The guys
something.
who spin around, right?
Yeah, they spin around. They
Okay.
have these cool kind of big dress things on that when they twirl, it does a thing. It's it's a cool religious ceremonial thing.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know people would be all that insulted if we had used the word dervish, but that was it. We were told that we were culturally insensitive if we kept doing
Mm.
it that way, so we
Yeah.
changed.
Yeah, well, so interesting talking about, religion and Halo. Now to transition into a little bit about the Catholic Church, and this is
Sure.
totally new ground. I've heard you talk about Halo plenty of times before. Never heard you talk about the Catholic Church. So I appreciate you coming on and talking about this.
Sure.
Um, I just want to start with the basic of basic questions, which is what is your faith background before the Catholic Church and growing up?
Well, I grew up as a evangelical Protestant Christian. Um, Ended up going to Wheaton College, which is Wheaton, Illinois, and it's the school Billy Graham went to.
Hmm.
It's a evangelical Christian college. It has a great music conservatory. That was the most attractive thing for me. Um, but yeah, I raised my kids in the Swedish Covenant Church. If you know anything about that, it's
I do
it's
not.
funny because it's called the Covenant, and I remember I was taken aback a little bit when we first started working on Halo. I'm like, Covenant, that I go to a church that's called the Covenant. So, but I liked it because it's like, okay, more religion. I liked all the religious symbolism that we're throwing around.
Was that
Um,
very like liturgical, or was it like did it have any, I guess,
no,
stained
no,
glass
no,
or?
no. This is evangelical Protestantism is pretty bare bones when it comes to liturgy and formality, and it's that where is it written kind of Protestantism.
Mhm.
It's these red meat Protestants who are like, don't give me any of these idols and things you do with your hands and
Yeah.
all these things. We don't want that. We just want to see the Bible. Is it in the Bible? And so that's kind of the way that it is. It's not so much fundamentalist as it is. It's I would say it's a little bit more rational in terms
Hmm.
of the intellectual arguing. You know, that kind of exegesis is like really hot stuff in the
Yeah.
evangelical Protestant church. Um, so yeah, that's where I grew up, and but I was always attracted, even when I was doing music in grad school. I was in an early music ensemble, so we were doing Renaissance and medieval music with a legitimate Renaissance and medieval instruments, and there was also a Gregorian chant group there that I was part of.
Yeah.
So
So you
I
had
didn't
these
make
these
anything
pieces
up.
of Catholic influence at
As
some
a matter of
point.
fact, yeah, I mean, I studied music history. You can't be a music major in a legit conservatory and take music history without running into the huge influence of the Catholic Church on music
Hmm.
history. So starting with the monk chants and the Liber Usualis, which is the book of just those neumes and melodies that have become sacred melodies because they were used starting in the 400s 500s,
Right.
and Pope Gregory, and then the Renaissance comes in and counterpoint comes in, but they're still basing the cantus firmus, the basic first voice of any piece that you write, especially in
Yeah.
the church, has to have a melody that comes from the medieval age. So
Yeah.
it's a the foundational voice is still from an old melody, and then they do all this great stuff on top of it.
So it's funny you say all that because I grew up when I was much younger in the Church of Christ specifically, and I don't know how
Okay,
much you know about the Church of Christ, but
a little
there are
bit.
no instruments. Like that's
Right.
the
That's
whole
right.
thing.
That's
It
right.
is
Not even instruments.
sacrilegious to have anything's a cappella, which is funny because they can have a cappella that sounds exactly like instruments, but you can't use instruments. And so all of this richness I was kind of not not privy to until a
Sure.
little bit later in my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And it's funny. You can understand because any tradition in a church can become dry and rote and for its own sake, and things become gaudy, and that's too much stained glass, and that's ridiculous looking, and now you're worshiping a statue rather than
mhm,
what the statue represents. So there, you can see why there's that sort of
right.
push and pull over centuries of when things get old and stale or become idolatry, and the original reason why certain things were in the church um,
Well,
have
so we
lost their
swing. We
meaning.
tend to
You
swing from
swing,
one
yeah,
extreme to the next.
and
Absolutely.
and the for me the Reformation, I'm a Martin Luther fan. I love Martin Luther, and I love some of the founders of the different Protestant church. John Wesley, but what happened by you know I was listening to a really interesting Catholic priest talk about this, and he was like, in sort of another universe, in a better place, uh, Lutheranism would be like any of the other Franciscan. It would be like a different branch of the Catholic Church. There would
Hmm.
be the Lutheran. What do you call those Franciscan orders? It would be a different order. It'd be a different sort of order. It's like yeah, the Lutheran order of the Catholic Church would be a little bit more focused in this direction, just like, you know, the Franciscans are focused over here,
Hmm.
and it would be like then we wouldn't have like said it's okay to leave the church, start your own thing, because as soon as you say it's okay to start your own thing, then somebody's going to start their own thing out of your thing, and then now we've got thousands of denominations, and it's like, oh yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. So my next question is, what? How would you describe your relationship with Jesus before and after the Catholic Church?
Well, that's interesting. I've always, I'm not going to say always, but since the time I decided and became a believer and I had a relationship with Jesus, it's been like Christ is my savior. I believe that everything in history points to Christ, and everything on both sides. It points back to Christ, points to Christ. So, you know, that part hasn't really changed. Um, I've had times when in my life where I felt sort of dry, or I felt spiritually like this isn't doing it for me, or I don't get it, or you have doubts and you walk through these deserts kind of thing.
Hmm.
So that's gone up and down, and it hasn't necessarily been related to the church I'm going to. But there have been times when I'm just like, you know what? I think I'm done with organized religion. It's just I think I'm done. I'm just gonna talk to friends who I know we agree and we have good discussions about what we believe, and I'm gonna read the Bible, and I read Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and Francis Schaeffer, and I'll read a bunch of people that I think are intellectually satisfying and spiritually on fire, and G.K. Chesterton and Dorothy Sayers and like all these people, right? But that has meant that I haven't had the communal part of faith, which
Hmm.
is I've now in my old age started to realize, okay, you can't just pretend like you can just be an island and do it by yourself.
Hmm.
There is a discipline, and there is a reason why you're called to community and the community of faith, the body of Christ.
Yeah.
That's a real thing. And that's why I'm in the Catholic Church,
Yeah.
because it's the one place that I mean, I can imagine potentially orthodoxy maybe being something that will attract me also later on. But at this point, I'm feeling pretty at home. It feels like coming home. It feels like, okay, this is where everything came from.
Yeah.
This is where, like, there are minor, what I would consider to be minor differences.
Hmm.
And we shouldn't make a big deal out of the minor differences.
Right.
And the unity of the body of Christ is more important. So,
So here's my question for you, because
sure.
my wife and I have been exploring the Catholic Church, attending Mass regularly for about 3 years now,
Oh,
and
excellent.
it started with, we were, when we got together, we were trying to find a church, and then we started going, what is church shopping anyway? Because we're like, every reason we could think of seemed pretty shallow. Like, oh, we like the way this guy talks. Well, this guy isn't the church. What happens when he leaves? And
Right.
all these other little reasons. We started digging into church history and like, well, what did the early church say about this? And we found ourselves here. But anytime this comes up or someone asks us about it, or, if I'm wearing a crucifix and they're like, oh, are you Catholic? And I go, oh, me and my wife are thinking about converting. Always the answer is, why? With this kind of, you know, what's going
Yeah.
on with you? So I was curious what your view of the Catholic Church was prior to discovering, the beauty that you have. And
Yes.
then how did that come about?
Well, let's see. I had Catholic friends when I was a kid, but they were always they always would go off and do mysterious things every once in a while,
Yeah.
which I didn't quite understand. It's like, what do you do? I can't go into this place with you because you're going to do what? Confession? What is that? Um, and it was also interesting because with my Protestant friends, you know, we, in the church I grew up in, we read the Bible all the time. We had Bible drills. We had what they called sword drills. Did you have those in your church?
Uh, I don't know. We
You'd
would
sit there,
memorize all of the
yeah,
verses.
a lot of memorizing, but
Hmm.
we would also be like, the teacher would say, okay, 2 Corinthians 12:9, and the first one to come up would stand up and read it. So
Yes.
it was like you got to know your Bible, Malachi, what? Whatever.
Yeah.
Um, so the Bible was like a huge, huge thing, right? And my Catholic friends, the Bible was like, what's that? Is that they never cracked a Bible. The cradle Catholics that I knew growing up. Now this is years ago. So it was. I just felt like, oh well, of course they're Christian, but they don't take it as seriously. They just go through a lot of motions. This is what
Hmm.
that was my impression. Um,
But you
and then
didn't
of
have
course,
any kind of like idolatrous, like, oh, they need to be kind of saved and brought into the real Christianity.
no, no, I knew people who were that extreme, who were like, there are Christians and then there are Catholics, and I
Right.
didn't believe that. And it didn't take me long. Because I love reading and literature, so I'm reading C.S. Lewis and Tolkien when I'm in junior high. Okay,
Hmm.
so junior high, high school, I'm reading, and I knew Lewis was Anglican, which for all intents and purposes is Catholic. It's so close to Catholic, it's hilarious. And then he was close friends with Tolkien, who was Catholic. And so I never thought that there was really that much distance between the two.
Hmm.
And Chesterton, I started reading G.K. Chesterton, who's Catholic, and he was a Catholic convert, or I think
Hmm.
he started off Catholic and then left the church and then come back. I forget what his story is. It's a great story. Um,
Yeah.
if you haven't read any Chesterton, he's spectacular. So I always had like a soft spot in my heart for Catholics. I thought, well, other than a couple of things I would disagree about, like, well, I don't really believe that, but it's not a big deal. That's the way
Hmm.
I felt. And believe it or not, even to this day, there are some things that I'm a little bit more like, okay, yeah, do I have to really believe that part? This whole purgatory thing? Like, no, not really. I'm like, okay, good. I've sort of not a big fan of the purgatory thing, and there are times when, and these are details, right? These are details because it's the liturgical the liturgy is the thing that I think has drawn me back to the church because
Hmm.
there's something so unchanging. That's what's so great about it. It doesn't change. And I started getting really frustrated, especially with what I would call the shallow American evangelical Protestant church. Um, they're blowing in the wind all the time. It's just like, oh well, now we believe this. I'm like, no, 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 wait. You can't just change what we believe. You can't
Yeah.
just do that. And the nice thing is, like, yeah, you might be sitting in a Catholic church going to mass, and sitting around you, you have no idea what the people around you actually maybe believe if they were to be put to the test.
Hmm.
But you know what the church believes. You know what the church stands for. And that isn't going to change. At least I don't think it's going to change in my lifetime. So
Hmm.
that part is comforting to me. It's just to like know that the words that we're saying, the order of service, the things that we're doing, these are, hundreds and hundreds of years and globally practiced. And
Yeah.
there's something so just comforting about that it makes me like that's where I want to be. So
Yeah.
that's not a great explanation, I guess. It's not about my comfort. It's just that it's to me we're so focused on our self identity, and like
Hmm.
how do we find ourselves, and we forget that we have to lose ourselves and be part of a community and give to others in a way so that we can actually be fulfilled as what we're supposed to be as children of God, right?
Oh yeah. Well, that's one of the one things I liked so much about Mass coming to it is that it felt much more in Protestantism when I would go to the different non-denominational and Baptist churches that it was almost like a show that was trying to entertain me and get me to sit down and enjoy what was happening. But in Mass, I was participating in it. It was like, hey, this is a thing. Like, oh man, it's boring. Well, we're not here to entertain you. This is like
That's
this is
right.
an activity that you join
Yeah.
into.
Yeah.
And
And you can
it's
imagine with me being a music guy, and my wife has a master's in choral conducting, and she was the church choir director for years and years at the churches we were at. And so music was always a huge part. I participated. We wanted it to be the best quality music,
mhm.
over and over and over. Like when if we're have moved to a new place and you're church shopping, music is always was always number one. Like,
Yeah.
well, that was church was good, it was nice, and these people were nice, but the music wasn't very good.
Yeah.
So it was just like I started realizing we're shopping for where we're going to participate in worship based on how well we're being entertained by musicians. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, that's a problem.
Yeah. What happens when they stop entertaining you?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You go to find a new church
Right.
because you're going to
Yeah.
find, oh, I'm going to go where that guitar player went. I'm going to go where that pianist went. It's
Yeah.
like, no, that made me, well, what that actually caused us to do is caused me to actually just stop going completely for a while. I stopped going
Mhm.
to church completely, thinking I didn't need it. And so it was my wife who started. The honest truth about how I became a Catholic is because my wife decided to become a Catholic. She was first. She
Yeah.
started it first. She was going to RCIA classes, and you know what that is, right? Have you
Yeah.
started any of that? Okay.
We've actually been through we're about to go through our third time. We've showed up each time and been like, "Hey, we're not sure if we're going to convert, but we want to learn about it." And
Yeah,
then at the very end we're like, "Okay, we're not ready." And then we did it again. And so now we're about to be like, this might be the one. I think this will be the one."
that's interesting because that's what my wife did too. She went through it, and then she came and we talked about it, and she goes, "Yeah, I don't think I'm ready to convert." She talked to the priest, and he says, "Yeah, if you're not ready, you're not ready." There was no pressure. And
Mhm.
then, a year went by or something, and she decided to try it again. She did some like personal stuff where she went to a retreat and then she went to through RCIA again. And I forget the guy's name. I think he's got a podcast or he's got a series, Father John somebody. I forget it's Detroit or something. But he's done a series called RCIA for Catholics,
Oh, okay.
which is very interesting because I think a lot of the current Catholic Church kind of realizes that the cradle Catholics don't know what they believe.
Yeah.
They just are going through the motions and they couldn't explain a single thing about what they believe.
Yeah.
And so this is why I think the Catholic Church is having some what I guess is like a revival. It's because it's becoming it's taking itself very seriously again, right? And in terms of its education and explaining to people who are participating, like, what is it you're doing?
Mhm.
And so she went through this RCIA for Catholics, even though she wasn't a Catholic. And I guess, sort of the grace that she saw in the way that was presented helped her to say, okay, whatever little parts that I'm not 100% on yet are not essential. They're not important. And
Mhm.
so she took the step. And so I would go to mass with her and then I would go up and, do the thing. And
Yeah.
it finally
You got to
dawned on
learn the
me.
code.
Yeah, I got to leave the code. So it dawned on me, is sort of like, well, you know what? I don't want to spend the rest of my life not being able to take communion with my wife.
Mhm.
So I know that probably sounds pretty surfacey, but like I decided, okay, I'm going to go through RCAA too and see what the heck's going on. Because if I convert, then I can go and fully participate when we go together. So
Yeah, I do
big
not
deal.
think that is surfacey. I think, well, and
Okay.
you talked about already some of the same concerns of why are we going to what church? And I think being able to commune with your wife and then following that, feeling all of this meaning through mass and through the process of converting and seeing the beauty in the past, Yeah, I think I'm a little bit too heady with it. I
Sure.
wish that it was a little bit less heady for me, but there's all
Yeah.
these little things. But similar to what you said, the priest, Father Innocent was his name, who we first talked to about RCIA, he had a similar kind of no pressure thing. And when we would bring these worries we had to him, he said a very similar thing, which was, the Apostles' Creed, that's it. Like, that's what's essential for you to become a Catholic. Anything beyond that is kind of like, if you believe it, if you don't, like the church believes it and we want you to believe it, but really what's important is the Apostles' Creed, and that's why it was
Yeah.
established.
Well, it was funny when I was taking RCIA and we went through the Apostles' Creed and Nicene Creed. Um, I would say, "Oh well, that's the same creed that I grew up with," and all these Catholics looked at me like, "Really?" Because they had this idea that Protestants were like, "Oh, they don't believe anything right, right?"
Yeah.
So there's
We make it all up.
we make it all up, and I'm like, "No, it's the exact same thing." Even to the point where we would say, the Catholic Church is in the creed, right?
Mm-hmm.
You say, well, you should remind me what it is. You say Pontius
Oh,
Pilate
I believe in the Holy Catholic Church, the
and the Holy
communion of
Catholic
saints.
Church, yeah. And it's like and they were like, well, how could you say Catholic Church is a Protestant? I'm like, because Catholic doesn't mean Roman Catholic. Catholic means Church Universal. It means the universal church. It
There
means
was
the
always
body
an
of Christ.
asterisk by it when I would read it in Protestant church. It always said it and had a little asterisk, and it was like,
To
not the
explain,
Roman Catholic Church. Yeah,
that's pretty funny.
yeah. So we get to
And
understand.
what I realized too, in terms of church history, the big schism in the church happened not with Martin Luther, but back in 1035 or whatever it was,
Hmm.
when the East and West broke, when Eastern Orthodox broke away from the Roman Catholic Church. That's really when, I mean, that's the first of the big switches. But
Right.
still, when you look at all the Christian churches, just about every real Christian church can say the Apostles' Creed, and that's what we believe. Have you read C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity? Do you know this
I
book?
have. Yeah.
Okay, so that's one of my favorite books because it it really is not taking a position on anything denominational or even Catholic, Orthodox, whatever. It's really just sort of saying what is at the core of Christian belief,
Yeah.
and like if you can go beyond that, you can choose this or this or this. He talks about it as though it's this, I think the way he describes it, it's like this big mansion and you walk in through these doors and you're in this great beautiful, welcoming hall, and then down the hall there are other doors and stairways leading to other things, and if you really want to understand, you have to go further in, but he's only going to show you the entrance hall.
Yeah.
So I tend to think of it a little bit like being a fan of baseball. Now, hear me out on this. This might be a little sacrilegious, but I'm a fan of baseball. I think the game baseball is a wonderful game.
Yeah.
Just the way it, all the rules, the way the history, baseball itself is a absolutely gorgeous, beautiful game. But you're not really a fan of baseball until you're a fan of a team.
Yeah.
So I'm a diehard Cubs fan, and that's just the way it is. And like, if you're a Mets fan, if you're a Braves fan, like fine. But like to really be a fan of baseball, you can appreciate the game, outside of something, but to really understand it, you have to go deep
Yeah.
into a team.
And if your wife is from LA, you can like the Dodgers. That's okay. Um, yeah, no, I like that analogy. One of the things I think is cool, like when you were talking about the different podcasts that your wife had found on the Catholic Church and why this revival might be happening. I don't know if you've heard of Pints with Aquinas or Father Mike Schmitz and a
Oh,
couple of these,
that guy
Bishop
I've
Barron
heard of. Yeah.
specifically.
Yep. Yep.
There's so many. There's like when I think of it, it's very parallel funny with like the Halo community. How, I mean, someone like myself making just Halo videos would be able to talk to you, and I found a very similar experience in this kind of Catholic community, because the internet is making big communities feel very small because
Yeah. I hear you.
we reach each other so well.
Yep.
And so that's been really, really meaningful. I mean, growing up thinking Catholics don't know their Bible, and then the Bible in a Year by Father Mike Schmitz being this huge thing that so many of my Protestant friends actually told me about initially.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's cool, and I made that connection when you said it. I was like, oh, it's like I don't know, everything's getting closer and easier to connect to with
Well,
the
and
internet.
part of it, I think, is I think there's, it's not like the world hasn't gone through desperate times, but there is some desperate stuff happening in the world, and like
Yeah.
the need for Christ and the need for God is certainly never been stronger, I guess.
Hmm.
So maybe that's part of it too. It's just like you look around and you're so untethered every other place that
Yeah.
I feel like maybe that's a reason why it seems to be. I mean, you're seeing, media and some actors and some writers and people seem like they're coming back to the fundamental faith. So,
Yeah. Yeah. So thinking of Halo and the Catholic Church together, I have this one question for the two of them.
sure.
But I was curious because I've watched so many different Halo videos and people talking about them, and I've heard so many people talk about how Halo 2 is this great story to talk about the evils of religion and how horrible it is. And that's part of the reason I made my video.
Right. I love that video, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
That means a whole lot coming from you, Marty.
No, it really did.
Um,
It was great.
but my whole thing was like, I really don't think it's anti-religious. I don't think Bungie was a bunch of militant atheists that were like, we hate religion and here's our beautiful swan song to anti-religion. So I'm curious, how do you kind of respond to that when you hear that it's anti-religious?
Well, I mean, that those are people who obviously have some other sort of agenda that they're trying to jam into things. I can tell you this, there's no, to me, art that is manipulative, like, trying to get you to believe this thing but not, but sort of hiding it inside the story some way.
Hmm.
It's like that's not going to be a good story. That's not going to be good art. It's going to fall flat. There's going to be no creative integrity to it. So,
Hmm.
there was never like here's the message that we want to get into people's brains without them really knowing it.
Right.
It was like, is this a good story? Is this intriguing? Is this cool? Is it based on all of everybody at Bungie has like different kinds of experiences, and we could come together and say this is a cool way to go. This is a cool story to tell. So there was never like, oh, let's try to convince people that religion is bad. Joe Staten, who was the main writer on Halo 2, was a preacher's kid. So, and he and I would have discussions about religion, and we didn't necessarily agree about everything, but we weren't. It wasn't like there was a bunch of anti-religious atheists at Bungie. I'm sure there
Hmm.
was a few, and I would discuss things with them. But like to me, it's like I was always sort of like, well, you guys know you're working on something that starts with a Gregorian chant,
Yeah.
and the title is Halo, and there's the Ark and the Covenant and the flood, like all these we're borrowing heavily from religious imagery all the time.
Hmm.
If you think Halo 2 is anti-religion, then Jesus Christ is anti-religion,
Hmm.
because he's the one who overturned the tables in the synagogue, and he's the one who called the scribes and Pharisees vipers, and like he was against the hypocritical blind following of not even faith, but just blind following of some tradition thing that could end up doing the exact opposite of what it was supposed to be doing.
Right.
So he if you really look at what Jesus Christ did in the world, he was not religious. you know,
Yeah.
he was the son of God, but he didn't just come out and say things in a way. He told parables, he told stories, he acted a certain way, and then he confronted um, the Pharisees and all the religious leaders of the day. He confronted them over and
Hmm.
over and over again. I mean, come on, that's why he was crucified. So it's like, so I'm not comparing Halo 2 to Jesus' ministry. What I'm saying is, you can point out, the problems with fundamentalist belief and blind faith, and you can point out the problems with all those things without
Yeah.
being anti religion or anti, especially, I think I didn't come to a conclusion there, but like I think that the stories that resonate the most are stories that acknowledge the fact that we are spiritual beings and we hunger for spiritual food, and that's what does it for us. Just
Yeah.
pure rational, no, as though there is no spiritual side to humanity. Those stories don't go anywhere. They just nobody likes those stories. So
Yeah.
why do we love Lord of the Rings? Right? I mean, why do we love Chronicles of Narnia? Why do we love these stories? It's because they touch on something that's true and real and who we are as human beings. We're spiritual beings. So,
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and for me, that's what I think I was trying to capture with this small series on Halo, is just like how fundamentally archetypal it is, and how it connects to that kind of deep magical stuff that we all know that we believe in some sense, but we don't necessarily know how to verbalize.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, that's what I love about it so much, is that it isn't telling a specific you've got to believe this. It's connecting with deeper, almost lower resolution truths, I
right.
guess I'd say. Yeah.
That's a good way to put it. I like that. Little sort of
Yeah.
low res truth. Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't get in too much trouble. It's kind of low res. It's all right.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
I also
absolutely.
like it's the archetypal thing. If you think about the hero's journey and all these other, these are things that people respond to. There's a reason why they respond to it. If you read any of the conversations between C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, especially when Lewis was converted to Christianity, he was an
Hmm.
atheist. But Tolkien, who was already, a Catholic don at Oxford, had been working with Lewis for a long time, and Lewis was complaining about the myths that he loved, and he couldn't figure out why he loved these myths so much because they were always about God and a dying God and a resurrecting God and all these things. And so he was saying, but these are already myths in all these other cultures. Why should I
Hmm.
believe this one? And then Tolkien said, well, it's because this is the one true myth. And it's sort of like, I think that just resonated for Lewis because he knew that this is where his humanity resonated
Right.
with the spiritual side of things as much as he wanted to reject it. And then to realize that it actually had happened in reality. It wasn't just, it's sort of like humans, our minds have been made to accept this story.
Yeah,
So
there's
we
a
accept
reason
it.
these other myths connect with us.
Yes, exactly.
Hmm.
All the archetypes work because there is a true one.
Yeah.
So that's an amazing, I love that. So
Yeah,
I'm with that.
absolutely. I do want to ask you real quick, since we've got a little extra time. Um, you ran for Congress, and that was totally unexpected for me. I remember going to your channel at one point and seeing this thing for you running for Congress, and I thought, Marty O'Donnell for Congress, where did this come from? So I have to ask you, like, what was the inciting incident on that?
Wow. So that I'm gonna either do a podcast or write a chapter in a book or something. My 101 days folly.
The tell-all.
I spent 101 days running for Congress, and it is a mixed blessing that I lost. My wife thinks it's a 100% blessing that I lost. Uh, yeah. So I'm sort of semi-retired, kind of looking around. Well, what sort of things can I do? And my daughter has a nonprofit that helps kids and families and is really, really good. So I've been helping her. And I asked her, like, you know, do you know anybody in the area that needs my help? And she says, well, there's a guy who's running for state assembly, and I think you'd like him, and you should talk to him. So I talked to him. I said, how can I help you? And he, you know, said, well, let me put you in touch with some of the people that I'm working with.
Hmm.
So these people called me, who apparently had run Governor Lombardo's campaign. He was the only guy who won in Nevada 2 years ago who was Republican, conservative.
Hmm.
Um, and so they're talking to me, and I said, well, I've got a following, and I can do media and I can do stuff. So like, if there's something I can do to help, let me know. And the guy said, well, have you ever considered running for Congress? And my, I just, I was silent.
Yeah. It's like, is
But
there
as you
someone
can tell,
behind me you're talking to right
yeah.
now? Or
And so he says, well, okay, you're not laughing. And I'm like, no, because I'm in shock. Like, no, I've never considered that. Although I've always preached that the problem with Congress is all of these career politicians, all these people who think that they deserve to have a career in the federal government.
Mhm.
That's not the way it was set up. It was set up like George Washington did. He was going to be president, and then he's going to go back to his farm.
Mhm.
Like you're a citizen statesman, right? You do this because it's your duty, and then you go back home. And I'm, you know, very much like Samwise and from the Shire. I'd rather stay in the Shire and not go to Mordor. But if somebody says this is your duty, then I kind of feel obligated. I used to tell my daughters when they were growing up, I said it should be like jury duty. It should be called Congress duty. Everybody who's a citizen should at some point know that they might get a letter that says it's your time to do Congress duty. You got to
Yeah.
come in, got to go to Washington for 2 years, do your thing, and then go back home. Nobody should think this is their career. And so because I've been spewing that for decades,
You had to live up to it.
I had to live up to it. I just felt like, okay, I got to at least consider it. So that's what I said to him. I said, okay, let me think about it. And so after the weekend, talking to my daughters and my wife and praying about it, I called him and I said, okay, what would be the next step if I were to go down this road? And he says, well, we want you to meet with the governor on Friday. And I'm like, that's not a next step. That's like some giant leap.
Yeah.
So sure enough, I met with the governor and we hit it off, and I knew he was going to support me if I ran and the whole thing. So I said, okay. And the final thing was this guy said to me, I said, look, this feels like a Hail Mary pass to me. This feels kind of late, and it was. And he goes, yeah, we're not happy with the other people who are running, but you have to understand how hard it is to find good people to run for office.
Hmm.
And that just hit me. It's like, yeah, if I keep complaining about all these morons in Congress, which I will continue to complain about because I'm justified now.
Yeah.
I tried. I was
You've
rejected.
earned it. You've earned the
I've earned it.
complaints.
I can totally complain about these people, but like you can't complain if you're not willing to jump in and try to fix something or change something or be at least part of the process. So I thought, okay, we get what we deserve. We get the people that we deserve. If none of the good people want to run, that means only the bad people run.
Hmm.
And so why are we surprised that only bad people are running the government?
Yeah. Well,
So
hats off to you for doing that, because I know I know just in my small experience with, I would not call it fame, but with internet presence. I remember when my first video started getting really popular and I started getting all these comments. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm amazing. And then I start getting negative comments and I was like, oh man, I cannot handle this. Like, I do not like it was like 100 good comments, but one guy being like, this sucks. You don't know anything. And I was just
yes.
like, I should give up. I shouldn't be making videos anymore.
Well, that's the good thing for me was it's not like I got shocked by the amount of vitriol that could be thrown my way because especially doing Halo and Destiny and being in the public eye for so many years, um, I've had my share of detractors and people who think I'm a complete jerk and egomaniac and all sorts of things. And it's like, okay, fine, whatever. I'll block you.
Yeah.
I don't need to hear from you.
Yeah.
But some of that stuff is like, well, yeah, they're kind of justified. That was sort of an idiotic thing for me to do or say or whatever. Um, but yeah, the internet is just filled with just black and white demonization.
Yeah.
That's it. And it's our politics are that bad now too. One of the things I learned was I was absolutely expecting it to come from the what I would have considered the opposition. I didn't think it was going to come from inside the Republican Party. So I was shocked to see there's just the blatant, outright smearing lies that were thrown at me by the opponents in the primary.
Yeah.
I was just like, what? Wait, I thought, aren't we all, don't we all kind of agree on, like, we eventually want to have a Republican in this seat rather than a Democrat? Like, isn't that what our goal is? But like, you're destroying the other people, but using the absolute most heinous kind of lying like that you could do. It's just like, these are just outright unadulterated lies. And how are you getting away with it? And it's like, oh, that's politics.
Yeah.
So
Some
that's
of them
what I
don't have a
learned.
farm to go back to, and they're like, I
Yeah.
gotta stay in.
The person who ended up winning, this is who they are. They are a lying person. They lie, and they need this as a career. Like I kept saying, I'm not a career politician. I don't need this. I don't need the money. I don't need the power, but I want to do the right thing. And this other person just starts lying and lying and lying, and then you look at what they're doing and you realize, oh, they need this. They absolutely have to win this because that's the only thing they have. And it's like, oh, that's really rotten. We
Yeah.
don't need a person like that near the levers of power. You don't
Well, I'm
want.
curious. Obviously, you're talking about some negative experiences with this, but
Yeah.
I was curious, being someone who leans right and is a little more conservative, did you ever experience any kind of major negative interactions in the world of art when you were working on Halo and things like that, or did it not come up as
Well,
much?
it would come up because number one, I was Marty the Elder. I was the oldest guy, even though I didn't get into the game business until I was 38, 39 years old. So by the time we did Halo, 2001, I was already 50. What was I? No. Wow. I don't remember what I was. I was born in 55. So what is that? 40. I was 46.
Okay, you're
So
older than I
Halo.
thought you were.
Oh, I'm old.
Yeah. you look
I'm Marty the
great
Elder.
for your age.
Thank you. Thank you. And you should grow some hair back again because you would look younger again.
Yeah, I'm trying to fake the. Well, I just got into the professional world in the last few years, so I'm trying to fake my elderism right now with a lack of hair.
Okay. Uh, it reminds me of one of the designers that I worked with at Bungie used to shave his head, and then years later I saw him and he had a big head of hair, and I didn't even recognize him. I thought he was this. I thought it was a different person. I thought he was way younger. It was really
Yeah,
funny. It's like the shaving the head is a definite mature thing to do.
this was part
But
of COVID craziness. That's where the shaved head came from.
is it? Oh, okay.
It
Because you
was like,
couldn't go to the
what do we
barber.
do? I don't know. I'll shave my head. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there you go. I started growing my hair out during
yeah.
COVID. I see some videos of me during COVID, and I'm like, wow, I was really
What was going on? Yeah.
yeah. What was going on? I don't know. It's still a little bit weird, but anyway, what was the question? I'm sorry.
Oh my
What were
gosh.
you
Oh,
asking me?
negative interactions because you
Oh
were
yeah.
conservative in the world of
So
art.
yeah, not only was the oldest guy and I actually had the most business experience. So people would come to me for advice. I already had a family. Like some of these guys had never even had girlfriends. Some of the, I remember when Lorraine and Rob got together and they were dating inside Bungie, and that was really cool. And like, so I just enjoyed working with all these younger people. That kept me young.
Yeah.
But we would always, at some point, we would talk about politics because I enjoy talking about it. And yeah, I was the most conservative person in Bungie, and everybody knew that. Everybody would come to me and say, "Hey, what do you think about this thing?" I'm like, "Well, here's what I think." And I'm like, "Yeah, we thought that's what you thought, right?"
Yeah. They're
But
like,
I would
let's
have,
watch Marty go off.
yeah, but it would be, it never got mean. That's the thing that I thought was, we always were able to have civil discourse, which is what seems to be so lacking right now. It's just the demonization, the polarization is so extreme, and it is toxic. It is just not good for relationships. It's not good for families. It's not good for communities. Um, it's just not good. So there is a way of discussing, important issues. These are all important issues, and you can discuss them without demonizing. And that's what I think is missing. And
Yeah.
I feel like I was always able to do that inside Bungie. There were a few people that were my go-to liberals that I would go, hey, Dave, what do you think about this
Yeah.
thing? And he would take the bait, and then we would start discussing it, and then we
Yeah.
were still friends. We'd go out for drinks or lunch or whatever. It didn't matter. But and there's a bunch of those guys that I'm still close friends with,
Yeah.
who were pretty shocked that I was running for Congress. I have a couple of them, Jay Wineland being one. He goes, Marty, I can't vote for you. He lives in Los Angeles now. I said, that's okay. And he says, I completely disagree with everything you stand for. I'm like, I know, but Jay, come on, it's me. He
Yeah.
goes, yeah, I know. So he contributed to my campaign, sort of reluctantly. But I said, hey, do you have a congressman now that will text you back if you text him? And he goes, no. And I said, well, there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
So
awesome.
it's there was a great relationships with people like Joe Staten is a dyed in the wool liberal, and he and I had some of the best knockdown drag out political fights. Some of them were sort of renowned throughout Bungie. People knew this. Oh, Marty and Joe are going at it. But there was one point when we were working on Oni together that they just kind of threw us into a room. They're like, you guys got to stop talking out here on the floor where we're all working.
Yeah.
Go into the game room, close the door behind you, and argue. And so that's what we did. It was pretty funny. And after
Yeah.
that, I remember after that we got to the end of our argument, and we were still friends. We were still friends, but we kind of made this deal like, hey, yeah, let's never go that far again. He goes, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We're like, yeah, we don't need to go that far ever again. So we didn't. So
Yeah, I have several friends because I grew up in theater and always wanted to do filmmaking, so I was always much more around very liberal-minded people, and
sure.
so many of my best friends are still to this day very, very opposite on the political spectrum. Also, I'm young and am not as passionate about politics, so that's part of making it easier.
Sure.
But Jordan Peterson is a huge influence in my life, and mainly because of psychology. Like that's how I discovered him from 12 Rules
That's
for
right.
Life.
You're a
And
therapist, right? Yeah.
right. And so yeah, it's funny because he's got this whole political side to him, but I put part of his a clip that he had in the Halo 2 video, and it's funny because it's literally like a 35-second clip of him talking about ideology, nothing political,
Yeah.
and
Did you sort of
almost
do a little effect on it too to make it look grainy or something
yeah,
to
yeah,
it?
yeah.
Yeah. I remember that. That was good.
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, so I was drawing parallels between
Appropriate.
Halo 2 and what he was talking about. But it's funny, 100% of the negative comments on that video, and most of them are positive. Most of the
Sure.
comments were positive. But like the 4 or 5 negative comments were severely negative and all about Jordan Peterson. They were like, I can't believe you would put such a horrible, hateful. And I'm just like, guys, he's not talking about politics. That's 30 seconds of a 20-minute video. What's going on here?
Yeah, and this is the demonization, polarization problem that's happening. It's like there are a bunch of little check boxes that if you don't check these the right way, you are a white supremacist Nazi. Period. You are a hateful, bigoted person if you don't just fall in line with the stuff. And I'm like, when I see that kind of response, I'm like, look, could we just, could we put that on hold for a second and let's just talk about one thing?
Yeah.
And if we can just isolate, like, let's define terms for a second and see if there's any common ground at all. But like this immediate labeling of people as, bigoted Nazis and stuff
Yeah.
is just so damaging. And it's the same on both sides. I feel like it's happening worse. Well, it's happening worse, in my opinion, from the far left. And it's not even about the far left criticizing the far right. It's the far left criticizing Bill Maher. No, it's like,
Yeah.
no. Bill Maher he's as liberal as you can, it used to be as liberal as you can get. He hasn't changed what he believes or what he thinks. This other side has gone so far down these
Right.
check boxes. It is like a religion. It has become like a religion. And
And
it's
that's
just,
where we need to play Halo 2 again, understand the
yes,
dangers of religion, and we can get it
exactly.
right. But that's why I was curious about if you had received any kind of negativity from the Halo community,
Oh yeah.
running as a Republican.
Yeah, there is there, people have known in the community that I was on the conservative side, and it's been funny over the years. I've gotten personal notes from a lot of different people who are in the community, some podcasters and people who are relatively well known, and they're like, "Hey, yeah, but by the way, I agree with you, but I can't say anything because I got to keep it sort of neutral."
Hmm.
And that's fine with me. I don't. There's no problem with me taking a position or having an opinion, and I don't blame people for being a little bit more middle of the road because of their career. Um, but in the last, I would say, 8 years, 10 years, it's just gotten more and more divisive
Hmm.
to the point where I've even been interviewed and had great talks with some people, and now they won't talk to me at all. Like they're just like I'm just anathema
Yeah.
because my views are so horrific. And I'm like, "Look, I haven't changed any of my views, and my views about people are haven't changed. Yeah, I'm a Christian. I believe in God. I believe in Christ. I believe that we're all sinners and we're all in need of grace, and no one is ahead of anybody else. So if we all need forgiveness and grace, then why the condemnation? I'm not condemning,
Right.
but it's coming back at me as though I'm this giant, mean spirited bigot, condemning guy. I
Yeah.
still don't get where it's coming from, but that's the current state we're in right now.
Yeah. I know you had mentioned that you felt like kind of the political game was messing around with art way too much and affecting Halo.
Yeah, I was interviewed. It was a political interview, believe it or not, and the guy also was a gamer, so he asked me about DEI, and I'm like, yeah, I think DEI is horrific. It shouldn't be part of the creative process at all. You shouldn't be hiring and casting and writing stories based on a checklist of what I consider. I look at DEI and I see it as a philosophical manifestation of pure, unadulterated Marxist view of history.
Hmm.
And I feel like if we wanted to have a discussion about that, I could support why I believe that.
Hmm.
So, but I also could say it's like, well, look at some of the products that have been put out by corporations that have put DEI ahead of creativity,
Yeah.
and you will see a failure. You will see failure after failure after failure because people can tell propaganda when they see it.
Hmm.
It's propaganda.
Well, and
If
I feel that way propaganda, whatever it's trying to say, whether it's liberal or conservative
Oh, I
propaganda.
agree. No,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's what I'm saying is like people reject propaganda. Propaganda never lives long, and propaganda is not stories. Now you can have, George L. Orwell wrote spectacularly good, sort of political satire or allegory, and
Hmm.
that's different. That's not propaganda. Propaganda is when you're trying to sneak in an agenda
Hmm.
um, because you think the agenda is more important than the story the story
Well,
you're trying to
an
tell.
agenda that's time locked. It's we're talking
It is
about one
time limit.
issue
Yes.
right now that
Yeah.
will fade away with time. But my question was, I know that you've talked about that with Halo and other games now, but other than changing the dervish, did you guys ever have any kind of major pushback?
That's interesting. So when the guy asked me about that, I did talk about the dervish. What I would say is I started to see it happen inside the studios. As the
Hmm.
studios got bigger, HR became a thing. Suddenly
Hmm.
we had an HR department. Like, oh, we've never had an HR department before. And now there's some rules, and now there's some ways of thinking, and there's a thing we're going to get behind this one political thing. And I'm like, I'm not behind that. I don't agree with that. I don't want to be part of that. So I started drifting uh, away from some of these corporate, yeah, I don't even know what to say. It's just, I feel like I saw like the C-suite executives at Microsoft and Bungie start to placate the loud voices in the community, and they wanted to stay safe. They didn't want to get into trouble with certain special interest groups, and they started doing things. It didn't affect the story that much when I was still there, but I could see that it was probably going to.
Yeah.
And certainly after I left, I see it in Destiny,
Hmm.
all the Destiny stuff. I see it in 343 stuff. I see it in all the, it's so many games, so
Hmm.
many movies, so many TV shows. I see it's just, it's just it's just rampant. It
Hmm.
just shows up all the time. And I'm glad I'm not actually part of the creative teams anymore, because I would have to say, yeah, I can't get behind that. I'm not going to
Hmm.
do that. I'm not going to, is this it? Is this my Waterloo? Am I out now? Like,
Yeah.
I went out over creative problems when I was fired. It was because of creative decisions, but they weren't, it wasn't based on, sort of politics or philosophy or anything like that at that moment.
Hmm.
I think if I had survived the early Destiny story problems that I died on that hill because I thought we were not doing the story we'd all agreed to do, and I wasn't happy with the influence of Activision on the
Yeah.
creative process. That's why I was fired. In my mind, that's why I was fired. You could talk to somebody else and they'll say some other reason, but that's why I think I was fired, because that's what I was fighting. I think if I had survived that, or if I had sort of like been able to negotiate my way through that period, I would have ended up being fired over something much closer to DEI influencing the story.
Yeah.
And that I would have just said, no, I can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm I'm glad that I'm glad to hear that it wasn't a major hurdle with the kind of original Bungie games. It keeps it.
No, the original Bungie games, there was something, I talk about it as a Camelot, it was like Camelot period, which is always just a period of time. It was the magic time when the mid 60s of the Beatles, right? It was just like,
Yeah.
how did that even happen, right? You look back on it and you go, wow, we didn't know how good we had it. That's the way I felt about that team in, the early 2000s through 2010. The Bungie team was some of the most talented, creative, interesting, you name it. It was just a great team of people who got together. And so, in my mind, was sort of the Beatles of game development. But it was not meant to last forever. And
Yeah.
that's why I feel like, oh yeah, here's the people I would want to get back together. Um, but the magic probably wouldn't ever be able to happen again. There was something about that time, those
Hmm.
people, the age of the people at the time. Who knows what that mix was? It
Yeah.
was pretty interesting.
So I have three final questions for you, and they're
Sure.
kind of, feel free to be as brief or elongated as you like. The one question to kind of wrap up all the Catholic stuff is, my wife and I are in this kind of precipice moment, and I'm curious. I asked this to many Catholics, but I'm honored to be able to ask Marty O'Donnell. What would your advice be to someone kind of on the precipice of it, but heavily considering it to kind of make
Yeah.
that final step?
Well, the thing I would say is number one, you can call it a final step, but it's not a final step, right? Because you can always undo it years from now. You can say, wow, I don't believe this at all anymore.
Right.
Uh, I mean, I would say to the detriment of your soul, you shouldn't do that, but there's nothing necessarily that final about it. But it does sort of feel like that, especially I think in the Catholic Church, because you are sort of acknowledging some truths that are universal and
Hmm.
unchanging, and it's important to understand that. But it's also something that once you get on the other side of it, you can just sort of relax. You don't. It's not like your mind stops questioning. It's just that you don't have to. It's not like you personally have to figure it all out.
Hmm.
You don't have to just figure it all out. You don't have to make sure is that you can that it all makes perfect sense to you all the time. That's
Hmm.
just not the important thing.
Yeah.
It's sort of a surrender to the idea that you need to get outside of your own head and
Yeah.
do some things with your body physically, go to mass, physically take communion, physically, kneel, stand up, genuflect, whatever. There are things you just need to do, and it's
Yeah.
just you're not going to question it.
Yeah. You
And
can
there's
listen to
something,
Inside Baseball for a long time, or you could play baseball.
yeah, yeah. Or you could be a fan of a team, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's one of the things I would encourage you on. And then the other thing I would say is just continue to focus on the fundamental, the core
Hmm.
of your belief. That's not going to change.
Hmm.
And there will be other things, like every once in a while, they'll they'll start praying to some angel, and I'm sort of like, yeah, see, I don't get that. I don't. That's I'm not going to pray to an angel. I'm not even going to pray to a saint. But like even with a saint, it's sort of like, well, did you ever ask your uncle to pray for you, or ever ask your mom to pray for you? And I'm like, yeah, I did. And it's like, well, that's what this is.
Hmm.
I'm like, okay, I can deal with that. But there's a point at which like, well, this saint is the closest to God, so I'm going to pray to that one.
Hmm.
It's sort of like there's some weird things that'll happen with, you know, there's some things about Mariology. There's some things about the Pope. There's things about saints and angels that in purgatory. These are all somewhat peripheral for me that I can accept at a level, but I don't have to be dogmatic about.
Right. Right.
So yeah, it is interesting though. Going through RCIA, talking about the dogmas, that was a fascinating series of lectures for me or studies because okay, let's get into that a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. There are some ones that will, yeah, get you scratching your head for a while, especially if
Yeah,
you grew up without any of that. I think sometimes the Catholics that I talk to kind of took it for granted because they had it their whole life, and I'm like, I'm totally thrown by this, and
yeah,
I'll have to spend about a year thinking about that. I think.
yeah, yeah. And I encourage you to keep doing that. Like
Hmm.
look at all those things and don't do something you're not comfortable with. Um I tend to be able to say, here's what I'm focused on. Here's the things that I think are somewhat peripheral. Maybe there are some people in the church that think that these are really important things, and I don't necessarily need to argue with them.
Hmm.
I just don't need to. It's just not part of what I think is core or important.
Right.
So it's not there. So
Yeah. Well, thanks. I appreciate that advice. So my two other last questions. One is this is a wide open question, but I'm curious to see how it hits you. Why is music meaningful to you?
oh, okay. Well, this is a huge issue for me. Um, so do you know who Steven Pinkert is? Have you heard of him? Uh,
I don't know.
he's a scientist. I don't know if he's an anthropologist. I forget what he is, but he's a sort of a Darwinian science guy, and he has explained everything based on evolution,
Hmm.
which is fine. I mean, fine. Let's it's interesting. Let's talk about it. Whatever. But
Hmm.
when it comes to music, he calls it it's something like evolutionary cheesecake or something. He's just like it's one of those things that he can't explain why music exists. There's no evolutionary reason why it should exist. It's the same as the reason we love cheesecake is because as animals, as creatures, fat and sugar were nutritional. Like we could get that, we could survive longer. So now the result is we love cheesecake and we don't really need it. And so that's his view of music is that
Yeah.
we love it, but we don't really need it. It's some random thing that happened evolutionary for who knows what reasons. And I just couldn't disagree more. I just think he's insane. I think that's awful. But I'm thinking of from an evolutionary standpoint, music, and this your Christ Church people or Church of Christ people would like this. Like I have watched Leonard Bernstein explain why music exists and origins of music and all this stuff, and I used to take it like gospel, like that was the truth. But over my years in my career, I've started to realize that music is much more inherent into every human being, every society. As a matter of fact, and this is my statement, music predates language in the human condition. Music comes first.
Hmm.
And it's because you can't even explain the evolution of our larynx and our vocal cords because it certainly wasn't in order to have language. It was to make some sort of utterance, and the only kinds of utterances we can make with our vocal cords that can let the other people in our tribe know who we are and let the babies we have know who their mothers are is our voice and our singing and our doing things with our voice that's modulated,
Hmm.
okay, which is musical. That's why all languages are musical. There's not a
Yeah.
single language that isn't inherently a musical language. So it's not that music is a language, it's language is a form of music.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I love that.
because of that, and I mean, if all you have to do, well, you have a dog. I hear a dog in the background.
Yes, I do have a dog.
Do you ever play an instrument or play music and have your dog start singing along? Have
Not
you had
singing along, no, but getting very excited.
a, okay, so you can look up on the internet. There's a million internet movies or YouTube movies of dogs singing with
Hmm.
people singing or playing guitar or whatever. Like and wolves, of course, the pack. They identify who they are and they sing. We don't really know why they're howling and singing. Monkeys and like all these creatures are using their vocal cords to communicate, but it's not a language. It's it's you can define it in musical terms.
Hmm.
Rhythm, volume, intensity, timbre, uh, pitch changing. All of these things happen in every language, and those are all musical terms. So music comes first. Music is part of who we are. And I one of the things you have to understand if you really look at it is why does music affect us at a level that is almost inexplicable?
Hmm.
And that's because we are creatures that are more than just our rationality and just our words. We are more than words. Words hugely important, but that's not all we are. We are creatures of art and creativity, and music is a part of every single human culture. And so, why it's important? It's just because it's who we are as humans. It's part of who we are from the beginning. And certainly, when you think about, especially as if you think if like you and I believe we're creatures created in the image of God, music is part of that. I don't know how or what or why, but everything go all the way back to the Old Testament, the earliest things, singing praises, singing to God, the heavenly choir, all of these things. There's so many musical terms that are used when it comes to our beliefs about
Yeah.
the supernatural. So
Well, and of
it's
course,
in there.
singing in mass is connecting that all back together. I remember the first time when I heard them singing just the words. It's not just songs, but they're singing the different parts of the mass, and I was
Yeah.
like, "What is going on?" But the more that I've gotten into it, I'm like, "This is beautiful," and I love it. And
Yeah.
sometimes I go to churches that don't sing certain parts, and I'm like, "Oh man, I wish we would have
Yeah.
had that different connection," because I
Well,
do
that's
think there's this feeling that it's kind of deeper than the words that I,
it
I
always
feel
is.
when we sing that part.
Yeah. And the thing is that when I was doing TV, film, and commercials and stuff, we had a slogan which was "Not by words alone," and
Yeah.
it was on our coffee cup, "Not by words alone." And the reason I loved that slogan, we went to a guy, he had a bunch of slogans for us, and that one just jumped off the page to me because I'm like, that's exactly right. Because of course we were working with commercial jingles and stuff, so copywriters would come to us and they'd have words, and they go, we need you to set this to music, and I'm like, yeah, right, not by words alone. You can't just tell people things. Sometimes you need to sing it. Sometimes you need to
Right.
play music along with it. Sometimes you need no words, just a Gregorian monk chant, and that means halo, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's able to speak at a level and in a depth that other works of art and other creativity things don't do,
Yeah.
and music. has that power. It's an amazingly it. What's interesting to me about music is it's a standalone thing, and it can service other creative things. Right? You can
Yeah.
have music helping a movie, helping a game, helping something, but you can also just listen to the music completely without anything else going on, and just it works 100% by itself if it's good enough.
Yeah. Well, and what Jordan Peterson said, what I really love about it is he said it's the one thing that we don't need the meaning explained to us. Like there's something about music, its meaning is just absolutely obvious, and
Yeah.
we can't necessarily or don't need to necessarily put it in words, but we listen to it because the meaning is just it's so clearly there and we feel it when we're listening to it. But
Which is that's why that's what's interesting about it. We're and we tend to be, especially in the West, we tend to be such big fans of rationality and the age of reason and writing and words and argument and debate, and music just blows all that out of the water. Music
yeah.
just cuts through all that. It doesn't answer any of the questions, but somehow deep inside you feel like it has answered a question. You just don't know what the question is sometimes. It's just I feel like it's been answered, right? You hear it and you're done.
Yeah, absolutely. There's that quote that's like the heart has reasons that reason knows nothing about or something like that. Yeah. And that's music, right?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I think so. I think it's certainly more than cheesecake. So,
Yeah, more than cheesecake. So the final question is, what do you hope people will take away from your work? Kind of at the end of your life, what do you hope will be the big thing they take away?
um, yeah, I hope that when people hear the music that I've done, that they feel like it answered questions that they didn't know they had, and
Yeah,
it wasn't manipulative, because you can I know how to write music to manipulate your feelings, but I never wanted to just do that. I wanted to write music that could evoke and enhance feelings and emotions, but that would come from a place of integrity inside me, so that that the music I would write, you know, express something real rather than something that was just manipulating you. Oh, this is just a jump scare. This is just to make you feel heroic. This is just to make you feel mystery. Um, all those things are important, but like at the same time, there's something even deeper inside of that than just the manipulation. So I hope
if it
that's
means
what.
anything, I'm very biased, but if it means anything, I think you've done that.
Oh, well, thank you. It does mean a lot. It means a lot to me too. That's why I keep talking to guys like you, and because when we're making these things, a lot of times the people who you're making it with they might not appreciate what you're doing. I might not even appreciate what they're doing. Like, I've come to appreciate more of the art that was done over the years with Halo. I'm like, wow, that guy I never appreciated how beautiful that was. Or I never appreciated like the kind of work that he had to do that,
Yeah,
or the writing, or all these different things that came together. And a lot of times, I remember people saying, like, people at Bungie who finally would play Halo after we shipped it, like a year later. I remember one guy coming to me who I worked with a lot, and he goes, "Man, I finally played the game with surround sound. Marty, that was just amazing." I'm like, "What? What are you?" This is a year after we shipped it. He goes, "Well, yeah, I was tired of it. We were working on it, so
yeah,
we were tired of it." But that just means that to some degree we knew that we were hoping there would be an audience out there would be fans out there would be players out there that would really get into what it was that we were making and appreciate it and see it. So it's not everybody, probably 95, 98% of the fans who have played Halo just picked it up, shot some aliens, had a good time, and then went on to something else. So that's
yeah,
fine. But it's the small percentage of people that kind of saw what we were trying to do, that is very satisfying.
yeah.
Very, very
And we
happy
just
to
can't
see
get
that.
over it. We can't get over Halo at this point.
Well, it's great. Good. Don't get over it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Marty, so much for this interview. It has been beyond meaningful to me.
Jackson, keep up the good work, keep the faith, and keep making these videos, because I saw your videos, and I love what you're doing. So
Well,
thanks,
thank you
everybody,
so
for
much.
having me. Yeah. See ya.